Just to circle back quickly, there's this little daily sort of mantra that I use. Some days the glass feels half empty, and some days the glass feels half full, and some days we can see the beauty of the glass regardless of the mood state. So I try and just play that.
I think that unlocked something in my brain just now.
And it's powerful. Storytelling is absolutely central to how societies have agreed or disagreed and rallied around ideas and cooperation, etc. If this was a stand-up routine, that I would say that 2019 was the year that shocked my hair curly. And my hair did go curly in 2019, in the way that Hemingway says we go bankrupt. Slowly at first, and then suddenly. Apparently it's hormones.
So good.
Creating a warm and engaging narrative for your podcast, consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and Andres Tamez. In this episode, today's guest has spent 2 decades on one of the toughest beats in journalism, following the toxic trails of pollution in all its forms. Leonie Joubert is a South African science writer and author who digs deep into the carbon pollution driving climate collapse, the processed food oil spill fueling hunger and disease, and the plastics leaching into our bodies and environment. Her work asks the hard question: who profits from the right to pollute and who's left paying the price? Welcome, Leonie.
Thank you. It's just wonderful to meet you and join you and realize that we're all on the same planet, Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, no. And again, you've done so much. It's been so many years of you doing this kind of work, and I can imagine you're exhausted. But when you started, what was that spark? What led you to this kind of work?
Oh, I mean, it was quite by accident. I really didn't have much of a social justice or environmental justice passion. I don't know. My father, when he was a young man, he was with the British Antarctic Survey. He was on one of the vessels that went down to Antarctica for a few years. And so there was always this kind of mythical place on the planet, Antarctica, that I always wanted to go to. And we also grew up in a part of the world that was very kind of rooted in nature. And I was a little bit indifferent to it. I didn't realize that my parents' connection with nature was actually just slowly growing into my own DNA. And then as an adult, as a master's student, when I was studying science journalism, I had an opportunity to get on the South African research vessel that travels down to halfway to Antarctica, where we have we have a weather base down on a place called the Prince Edward Islands, and then it goes further down to Antarctica. And I couldn't get all the way to Antarctica, but I could get to the Prince Edward Islands. And that's where it started. And then I was just tagging along behind a team of scientists that were looking at how rising temperatures and shifting ocean temperatures around that small little ecosystem, which is like a nicely contained laboratory, how things were changing. And I wrote a few essays around that, and I thought, maybe there's a book here. And when I got back to the mainland, I was a complete rookie. I had no idea what I was doing. But I started writing a series of essays around how rising temperatures, changing CO2 in the atmosphere, that kind of thing would impact on elephants in savannas, or frogs, or people wanting to grow maize, or, how the desert would spread. And that was my first book. It was called Scorched, South Africa's Changing Climate. And I think it was at a time when very few writers in the country were focusing on this issue. And yes, then as a result, I just, it's kind of this blending of long form storytelling with the science. And then as I went deeper and deeper into the issue, I realized that actually I'm writing about pollution and the system of pollution. So whether it's carbon pollution of the atmosphere, whether it's nutritional food, pollution of our bodies with food-like products, whether it's plastics pollution, it's the same system. These big, powerful corporations have an ability to shift the system to their benefit, and the environment and individuals pay the price. So I want to tell the stories of the environmental and social consequences. To put a face to the people who end up losing a limb to diabetes, or a river that gets clogged up with plastic and a species of frog, is threatened. Mm-hmm. That's that kind of thing, but using deeply descriptive storytelling.
That's impressive. And it's really hard to balance science data with storytelling. But humans, we love stories. We love a good story. So how do you do it? Where do you strike that balance?
I think it just comes naturally to me. I used to absolutely immerse myself in books as a kid. And so I think my brain was already trained in that direction. And then I was just incredibly lucky, as a woman in this world, to find her area of competence and then to be able to hone it. I think many people, there are a few people who are gifted, like born writers, brilliant writers. A lot of us just have to learn it through heavy lifting, through slogging,
trial and error.
Totally. And, I feel as though I'm only now 20 years later learning to really tell a story. But it's such a privilege, I love it. It's a combination of creativity and hard intellectual thinking. And it's powerful, storytelling is absolutely central to how societies have agreed or disagreed and rallied around ideas and cooperation, etc. Storytelling is essential. And of course, we engage with stories because we've got these mirror neurons in our brain. So when we can see and feel and experience someone else's pain or joy or happiness or suffering, we respond to it much more so than if we just get the clinical facts.
Yeah.
And I think that's the joy of long form journalism, is that it can bring the hard facts, but in a way that actually really lands in someone's soul.
That's
a beautiful way to say it.
You are a writer. You are a storyteller. And is that where the idea for Story of Arc comes from? Can you tell people what that is and what you're involved in now?
Yeah, so it's quite a hard story to tell. Because, I often say that if this was a stand-up routine, that I would say that 2019 was the year that shocked my hair curly. And my hair did go curly in 2019, in the way that Hemingway says we go bankrupt, slowly at first, and then suddenly. Apparently it's hormones. So I was just about to turn 48, and literally, my hair used to be kind of the straight, funky little pixie cut. Then suddenly one day I wake up and I've got this Ronald McDonald clown cat. Anyway, but I digress. The reality is that 2019 was the year that the scientific community, or the year before then, really, they told us that we had to really keep the global average temperature to within or lower than 1.5 degrees C. But a lot of scientists were saying there's absolutely no way we're going to achieve that. If we want to, and it's, of course, as you know, it's not this gentle, nice, linear increase. It's, we've been in this lovely, stable state for sort of 12,000 years. And now we're kind of tipping. And they're saying we're just about to lurch across into another state. And I just suddenly realized that I'd almost been alive for 50 years. And in that half century, more than half of the pollution driving climate collapse had been dumped into the atmosphere, that I'd been writing about it for 20 years, and the situation is just so much worse. And now we were being told we've got 10 years to radically kind of put on the handbrake.
A question. So what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that we're reaching a point where there's going to be, it's sort of climbing stably, but there's going to be a runway where it's just going to exponentially explode once we reach a certain point? Is that basically what I'm hearing? Because it's interesting to see how it feels, because there's a consensus, and then there are people like me that don't know about the consensus, among people that are in this world of climate, and then there's people outside of that world who have don't understand what the consensus is.
Okay, so the consensus is very, very clear. And I think where some of the difficulty comes is a lot of us don't understand the difference between evidence-based scientific consensus compared with consensus that is based on ideology, compared with consensus that is based on misinformation, for instance, what we see on social media. So to come back to the evidence of climate change, we don't have to believe in gravity. Gravity still has a hold on us. In terms of the question you asked about the exponential increase, maybe this is a good way of framing it. I'm sure most of your listeners will have watched the movie Don't Look Up. And the movie uses this very useful metaphor of an asteroid coming in, it's going to hit Earth, and a few scientists are trying to alert everyone that this is going to happen. And it's a useful metaphor because it does really shake you awake if you engage with it, but it's also overly simplistic because it suggests a single event at a known and fixed time in the future. Whereas I think a better metaphor is to imagine that that Earth is spinning into a cloud of rock, space debris. It's this huge cloud of debris, and that we're already spinning into it, and that around the planet, as we get deeper into this cloud of space debris, these rocks are going to start hitting the atmosphere, burning up, and they're going to start hitting the Earth. And we can't necessarily say precisely where each one is going to hit and what the blast radius will be, but we're already seeing a dramatic increase in this raining kind of shower of space rocks. I mean, if you look at the LA fires, if you look at, we've had absolutely terrible, catastrophic cyclones up the east coast of Africa. Just around the world, you're seeing extreme events, and they're getting much, much, much worse. And realizing that, it just broke my brain. So at the same time, I'm having this personal kind of existential exhaustion crisis. At the same time, and for those of you who are watching, this in the background is the cat called Mouse. She is the chief navigator and plucky comic relief on my trip, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But yeah, so journalism has really collapsed globally. I mean, some of my major sort of outlets, I was writing for National Geographic magazine. I was writing for a local title called the Daily Maverick. Massive staff cuts across many of these newsrooms as they lose revenue. So, and then at the same time, we're told that climate reporting has never been more urgent. So I'm in this situation where I've lost my income. I am freaked out about, I have to be effective in the next few years. I mean, this is not about what I do when I'm 60. It's about what I do now to be effective in terms of shifting public discourse. At the same time, I'm going broke because I can't get any work as a freelancer. And then I decide I'm just going to sell my home. I'm going to take just what I need, put it into storage, and get into this little plumber's van with my cat. And we're just going to travel around the country and just see what happens. And it has been extraordinary. I've been on the road for 10 months. Fortunately, I was able to get some funding partners that helped to sort of pay the basic expenses. And it's allowed me to find the stories that really demonstrate how the climate how climate change, climate collapse is unfolding on our doorstep here in Southern Africa. But also, amazingly enough, finding people who are addressing the challenges in their very specific communities. And it's not always about climate. It's about the systemic stuff that is making them more vulnerable and how they're rolling up their sleeves and getting the job done to make themselves more resilient. So yeah, I can either call myself a broke, homeless, middle-aged woman living out of a van, or I could describe myself as a woman of such extraordinary privilege that I have been able to spend 20 years honing my skills in this way, and that I'm able to safely go out into the world on my own in a van with a tent in the back and just travel wherever the story takes me. And it's been a lot of fun.
That's really cool.
Fun.
It's very much like half glass full empty discourse, isn't it? And of course, I guess the only obvious follow-up question is like, what are these stories you're finding? What is something that has impacted you? What have you seen on the road?
So there are a number. Just to circle back quickly, there's this little daily sort of mantra that I use. Some days the glass feels half empty, and some days the glass feels half full. And some days we can see the beauty of the glass, regardless of the mood state. So I try and just like play that.
I think that unlocked something in my brain just now.
Yeah. So
I'm going to have to sit with that. Okay.
So one of the very first stories that I did, I mean, what a privilege. So on the west coast of South Africa, we have a kind of a semi-desert going up into a desert. And then as you get to the Namibian border, this beautiful desert, it's called the Richtersveld. I don't know what that means actually. But it's mostly covered with these very small little succulents, and really in many cases endemic. They don't occur anywhere else in the world. But there are three towering tree aloes. If you imagine an aloe that is sort of 2, maybe 3 times taller than you, and has these beautiful kind of candelabra kind of clusters of leaves. There's one is called the giant quiver tree, one is called the common quiver tree, and the other one is called the maiden's quiver tree. And they have been hammered. I mean, these are desert adapted species, right? They know how to handle a hot day. But they've been really hammered as temperatures have climbed in the area. And more recently, there's been quite a severe drought. And so what has happened is scientists have seen kind of like an advancing dust bowl in this part of the world. And in some places, it might be irreversible. And there is one specific site and one specific professor who's been working in this area for 40 plus years. And he was going to do a survey of one population of tree aloes. And I was able to join him. And this was possibly his very last visit to the site. And I mean, this was like going into the desert with desert ecology royalty, but very poignant, to get him reflecting on how much the ecosystem has changed, talking about individual trees that he has, he's got historic photographs of this one tree going back sort of 50, 60 years, and then his own experience of visiting this specific tree himself, which was really touching, moving,
Wow.
very moving. And I thought when I started this project, I would be on the road for just a year, quickly dash here, dash there, do a couple of stories. I've only really covered 2 ecosystems in 10 months. One is this desert and all the factors that are driving this desertification trend, the Dust Bowl trend. And a little sidebar. It's a little bit like reliving the real life version of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. He's writing about the 1930s when you have economic factors. So, these
Right.
growing multinationals in the agriculture sector. You've got this drought, terrible drought, and it ends up driving these smallholder farmers off their land, and they become migrant fruit pickers. And if you look at what's happening now, for instance, the Dust Bowl conditions in that part of the world, the same economic forces. It's not the farmers that are necessarily being driven off by big agricultural firms, but it's the big mining firms that are moving in, and they are so powerful. And they are, some huge diamond mines. They break the ground. So you have this, what should be a stable, hard desert, flat area. The sand gets broken, the wind picks up the sand, and basically it's like a wildfire. The sand just gets blasted across the landscape, which then kills the plants further down, these tiny little desert adapted plants that are designed, they evolved to handle sandstorms, but they can't at this intensity. So those plants get killed, and then the ground gets left bare, and then the wind picks up that, and literally
is it just because of the coverage? Just the coverage of it? It just can't get enough sun, just starve, or can't breathe, sort of.
That's a good question. In some cases, it's because they get smothered by this mobile sand, and in some cases, the leaves and stems actually just get sandblasted and killed. So you have two.
Right.
So you have the 2 factors happening, and then
weathers it away. Just their entire. Oh my goodness, that's wild.
So you've got a little bit of like decades of maybe overgrazing from farmers. You've got decades of mining. You've got aggressive new mining prospecting, and then you have this drought. and climate bringing higher temperatures. So you've got these changes happening across scales. So that was my first sort of 2 or 3 months we're looking at that. And then I drove to the other side of the country where we have, I mean, it's completely opposite. We've got these massive grasslands that are quite high altitude, beautiful grasslands, what you would call prairies, I think. Hey?
Right.
And these are really important, not just for farmers who have livestock like cattle mostly, but also sheep and goats. It's so it drives the sort of local livestock-based economy. But these grasslands are also really important water factories. So, rain, it's a high rainfall area. So you have a lot of rain hitting the ground, and that trickles down into these massive river systems that feed huge areas, not just of South Africa, but of our neighboring countries. And then you also have the carbon climate role that they play. So we don't have a lot of natural forest in this part of Africa, but we do have a lot of grassland and a lot of savanna. So grasslands are one of our most important ecosystems for mopping excess carbon from the atmosphere and locking it in the soil. So if our farmers can be supported to graze their land and manage their land well, it's not just for their own household benefits or the regional economy or for putting a chop on the barbecue. Sorry, a chop on the braai is what we would say. You would call it a steak on the barbecue, I think.
Yeah.
the Americans. But yeah, if they are custodians of a landscape that supports regional water and global climate stability. So I've been doing a number of stories on the various factors that are making it hard for farmers to do that. And we're talking indigenous farmers, and we're talking politically this is difficult, but the white farmers who are from settler stock, so.
Which all in all, they're farmers. They have a role to play in this sort of ecology. And you see a lot. Do you see any we've seen a trend of not just not support but hostility from political entities towards farmers? Do you see that in Africa as well? Because I think we've seen that in Europe, kind of seen that in the United States, especially against farmers that aren't from big corporate that aren't part of a big corporate stack.
Yeah, I don't think so. The question of land in South Africa is very political, and it's quite a difficult one. I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole here because it involves talking a lot about our imperial, colonial, and apartheid era history, which is really problematic, and it kind of lingers. It's just such a sticky issue. So the fact that so many indigenous families and homes and communities were driven off their land. Now you have, the descendants of settlers own most of the farming land, and the indigenous communities are, shoved into these tiny little areas. So that is more of the issue. I don't think there's as much hostility from governments. I think what leaves most farmers vulnerable actually are the market forces. The food system is dominated by large corporations and large agribusiness, and they because they leave farmers as price takers, on the food, on the commodity side of things. And from all of the farmers I've spoken to, whether they are really small households or these massive commercial farms, they are just one extreme event away from bankruptcy in many cases. One bad fire, one bad drought, and they lose it all because there's just no fat on the bone. Because the system is just stacked against them. So, how do we make all of these farmers more resilient so that we can have better, more healthy food on the table? Our grasslands are managed in a way that's for the common good. Yeah.
And is that what your goal is with this kind of reporting and story of ARC? Is it to bring awareness to these things to sort of create the future you want to see?
Yeah. So can I tell you one of the most amazing stories that I found? And it just blew my mind because it was so off my radar. So I arrive in a little Eastern Cape town called Matatiele, and I get introduced to an NGO called the Environmental and Rural Solutions, and they have been working. So this NGO and local communal farmers, so indigenous farmers, Xhosa speaking, from the kind of culture where it's very much a livestock-based economy. So each family has or most families will have a small herd of cows, maybe some sheep. They earn a little bit of income from maybe, if they need to send the kid off to varsity, they'll sell a cow, or also strong kind of cultural roots there. Anyway, one of the things that is undermining the farmers' herd health, which then drives them to have more cows grazing the veldt. That's veldt. That's a local word for grass prairie. Is the fact that people are throwing disposable nappies out into the veldt. Now, here's the problem. Families here, so we're like far away. These are people who don't have cars. Many of them don't have jobs. They have a little bit of income from social grants. Maybe a member of the household has traveled to town, has a job there and sends money home each month. But there are no jobs in the community, and the nappies that are available to them, they only have the single-use disposable nappies. You can't buy cloth nappies anyway. Now, I was just doing the maths on this. A single nappy. Now, imagine you've got a household with very little cash. A single nappy, disposable nappy, will cost 20 US cents. Not a lot of money, but the problem is that there's no municipal waste collection out here. You can't burn these nappies. You can't bury them because they're made from indestructible plastic and absorbent gel. So the families don't know what to do. So they just like out of sight, out of mind. They throw it into the veldt and hope that nature will take its course. And invariably, as we now know, plastic does not biodegrade. It just breaks down into smaller parts until you eventually can't see it. But the problem here is that the cows were eating the nappies as they broke down, so that causes potentially lethal gastric obstruction. But at the same time, having human feces in the system means that the tapeworm cycle keeps ticking over. And that means that the abattoirs they just thought it was too risky to buy these animals, because by law, if an abattoir has a cow and they find the carcass has got more than 50% of its tissue can show sign of tapeworm damage, then they have to dispose of the carcass. They can't use it. So they don't want to buy from these farmers. So the farmers' economy is undermined. Anyway, so that was the reason that the community, and in fact, it's still gender roles are still quite, fixed here. But it was the farmers that said, we have to deal with the nappy problem. And so they teamed up with the NGO, and they found a small organization that makes these fantastic washable nappies. And I mean, this is like the Ferrari of washable nappies. Gone are the days of those, those huge toweling ones that our parents used to use where you've got to try and not puncture your baby with all the safety pins or whatever. It's a cute little pants that have a whole lot of press studs so that the nappy can grow as the baby grows. There's a waterproof liner that you put in that's also washable. And then they put the a completely compostable liner to catch the solids. And I mean, this is what most women are saying is like, we don't want to wash the poo. And I mean, I can completely get that. And of course, but this community is so far off the e-commerce grid. I mean, they are like miles from anywhere. So the NGO bought a whole lot of stock from the company, had it delivered there. And then the NGO working with the community, they found people in the community that wanted to become sellers of this product. And I mean, it's super cheap, so if you imagine, I did the maths here again for you. A child support grant from the state is the equivalent of about $32. And to buy a pack, I think, of 5 nappies is less than that. And over the course of a child's nappy wearing days, from infancy until they're potty trained, a family will spend about $850 which in South African terms for these farmers, that's the equivalent of buying 3 cows. So that's using the disposable nappies. But if they buy the washable nappies, these ones, they spend the equivalent of 1 month's social grant to buy these nappies, and those nappies will last the kid, for its nappy wearing days and can be given to the next kid or the neighbor's kid or whatever. So it's a fantastic example of how they put their heads together and they just solve the problem.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, like, I think we were talking about this earlier, where there are system changes that directly impact the climate and make, our resilience to climate change better, but also just make life better. They're not, because with this, you're cleaning up an issue that you have in the economy, but also in the environment, and also in a household, and also in systems of childcare. Like, there's so much good that comes out of this. So I think it's a very holistic example of how that looks.
Yeah. So the first, I'm doing a 4-part series on this. The first part looks at what this community has done to solve the problem themselves. The second part, I then got hold of, I wanted to look at who are the powerful players in the system. In our constitution, we have a constitutional right to a healthy, safe environment. My question to these corporates was, you're really powerful in the system, whether you are nappy producers or whether you are big retailers that are stocking you. You choose what to stock your shelves with, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is your single-use plastic policy? And how does that align with the single-use nappies you're stocking? And how does this align with your responsibility, your legal responsibility to uphold citizens' right to a healthy, safe environment? Do you know what? Almost none of those corporations replied to my messages. I got one reply from one of them. It's like they don't give a hoot. So yeah, we know exactly who can make the biggest difference if they just got a backbone and put the health of the environment and these families ahead of their own profits.
Yes, but in this system. And I guess one of the last things we want to hear from you is, how can people get involved? Because you are just one person going around collecting these amazing stories and sharing them with us. I think that's really inspiring as an individual who sometimes feels like, well, am I even doing enough? What else can I do? So what would you tell someone?
Yes, I now love this question. I used to hate this question because I never had an answer for it. And then, of course, Yuval Noah Harari, the historian and all-time genius, he put out an answer recently, which I now draw on. He says, for an individual who wants to be able to make a change within this massive system where you feel so small and insignificant, the best thing you can do is to either start a movement or join a movement. And look, very few of us have the time or resources or the skill to start an organization, but we can join and support those organizations that are already doing the work. If you look at, there are so many organizations, really big ones, tiny ones, like the NGO that was doing the nappy work. These are organizations that they have the theory of change. They've got the networks. They know how to leverage policy. They know how to mobilize communities. You can give them money without even leaving the comfort of your armchair activism, or if you have skills, you can volunteer your time and skills. The one thing that has really come through so clearly for me in the last few months is that as this shower of rocks starts hitting our planet, we are all going to have to become first responders, and we are all going to have to get involved. I mean, none of us can avoid it anymore. It is frightening, but there's also so much research to show that when you find your point of leverage and you work that point of leverage, whether it's to help, if stray dogs are left hungry after a fire, or, people need humanitarian aid after a terrible flood, whatever. Or these slow burn things like the nappy pollution in this neighborhood. If we can find our point of leverage and do just a little bit, it'll do wonders for our own sense of well-being, and it will help us overcome this paralysis.
I love it. That's perfect. And we're going to talk a lot more about that on the blog section. So visit tangeliclife.org to read more about that. Thank you, Leonie, for being here. And yeah, we're just going to dive in and get some more ideas of how to avoid despair in this system and climate crisis that we find ourselves in. So once again, this was Tangelic Talks. Thank you for being here.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.